Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Tech Show. I'm your host, John Myer, and today we're continuing with our week-long series on multi-cloud. We've heard from leading cloud experts on the right reasons to utilize multi-cloud from the business need or the unique services they offer, including the skills that are required in order to properly support a multiple cloud environment. First, what is multi-cloud? Well, Google says it's the use of multi-computing and storage services in a single architecture, which also refers to the distribution of cloud assets, software applications across several cloud hosting environments. But are they choosing it for the right reason? If you're interested in listening to other public cloud leaders on multi-cloud, please take a look up here. Also, stick around because you're going to want to hear what they have to say on multi-cloud and does it really work? Oh, and while you're at it, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and the notification because we have more content on the way. Joining us today is enterprise podcaster who always keeps the party going, none other than the DiscoPosse podcaster himself, Eric Wright. Eric, thanks for joining the show.
Thank you very much, John. This is I love when we get a chance to spend time together when we're not at events, which sadly, it's been a while since we've been able to do this IRL, as the young kids would say. Thank you very much for letting me jump on. I'm excited about the chat.
I'm excited to return the favor. I know I was just recently on your podcast series. And when I thought of this topic, I reached out to you and I was like, you know what? Eric, want to do one? I'm thinking about multi-cloud. And you said, man, that is right up my wheelhouse.
That's it. It's our people. We know this stuff.
Yeah. So, Eric, before we jump into the topic, how about you give the audience a little bit of backstory on yourself and your show?
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Eric Wright, otherwise known as @DiscoPosse. That's the easiest way to track me down. It's like an old school thing. I was in a band a zillion years ago, and that was the name of the band. So when I was picking a domain name, it was not taken. Eric Wright, however, vastly difficult to get SEO for. So that's why I'm DiscoPosse. By day, I'm a technology evangelist for a company called Turbonomic, now recently an IBM company, which is super cool. Just got acquired, so that was a lot of fun. We're in the throes of really, really neat stuff that we're doing there. And then by daytime, if people recognize the background, I have a podcast as well called aptly so the DiscoPosse podcast, featuring folks of interest like yourself, John, and lots of startup founders and people and generally in the startup and technical ecosystem. So it's a lot of fun. And I do long form. So it's a very conversational, you get a chance to relax on it, which is kind of neat. It's a bit of a different style. Well, different for me. Not different. There's like thousands of podcasts that use this style, but it's different for tech folks to be able to kind of go for over an hour and really, not feel like they just got to hammer out talking points.
Or went through some PowerPoints. And you know what? I love our conversational style. In fact, my entire shows revolve around conversational style, maybe some demos, and we just have a back and forth, natural conversation. There's no editing, really. There's a beginning and there's an editing, one shot. You mess up, it's sticking in there. The audience love it.
I got to give a shout out to folks. This is my plug, shameless plug. Go check out the podcast that John and I did. If you go to discopossepodcast.com, you can actually just do a search for John Myer on there. And this was truth in editing. I only edited one thing because
when your laptop fried.
My laptop completely just baked right as we were getting rolling towards the end. So you do have to check it out. I'll watch till the end. It is hilarious. So it's actually audio form, video up as well to go with it.
I left some awesome stuff on it. I was like, you know what? I'm going to leave this on here. I hope he leaves it. And then we ended up going on your phone.
That was gold.
Oh, you kidding me? All right. So, Eric, I want to jump into it. Wait. Actually, I got to tell you, I did my homework on you, and I read up that you are a VMware specialist, open source, Microsoft Active Directory, and something called PowerShell. I'm going to tell you, I once specialized in all that except for open source. Don't tell anybody at all about it, but...
Safe with me.
Yes. And all of my 10 subscribers and listeners.
Hey, it'll be many more soon. Trust me. I can see you're doing great stuff.
I think we both are, and we give back to each other in the community because it helps us strive. I really appreciate working with you on it. All right, let me jump into the quick question of our topic, multi-cloud. Does it really exist? And is it very successful or even a successful implementation?
This is it's a controversial topic, right? And I'll say, as the kids would say, also hashtag fake news, right? So multi-cloud it's the reason you do it is not the reason you do it. You think you do it. I'll say, as the old Princess Bride thing, is you keep saying that word, but it doesn't mean the thing that you think it means, right? When people, and I actually wrote a blog, and I had Chris Saltis from Miss.io. Chris is really fantastic. He and I had a couple of great long form conversations about this stuff. Multi-cloud as a purposeful strategy is like a unicorn of real requirements and use cases. But multi-cloud is what you're stuck with, because guess what? Multi-cloud happens, it's a thing. So maybe we can help to delineate why that's an important thing. Of like, no one says, you know what we need to do, John? We're going to build a multi-cloud portfolio, and it's going to allow us to be strategic against our competitors. Says nobody ever, right? It's just, if you do, maybe you're Netflix or like LinkedIn or fantastic single application SaaS environments or product environments or B2C environments. It's business to consumer for the product marketing kids. And if you look at those ones, they have a requirement for diversity of underlay, for safety, as well as maybe for bargaining position. But for folks like most of us, you really don't go to your cloud provider number one and said, well, it'd be a real shame if something were to happen to all these workloads I've got over here and I moved them over to your competitor. They'd say, okay, well, let us know if you need a migration product, because we've got one of those too. It's really, really hard to. Yeah, most of it's like, don't let the door hit you where the good Lord split you.
So you mentioned, first of all, the Princess Bride quote. Interesting, meant that we won't date ourselves, because I am very familiar with it. It was actually on a couple of times the other day. You mean to tell me you don't wake up and say, you know what? I'm going to go tell my boss we need a multi-cloud approach. You want to know why? Because I think we need to diversify our skill sets in multiple clouds. And I want to be a generalist, not a specialist in one cloud provider.
Yeah, it's a fantastic opportunity for technologists to be able to dabble across cloud platforms, because it's bound to happen. And that's why when I say multi-cloud happens, it almost needs to be like that other thing that happens, right? Shirt that we have this idea of. You get multi-cloud because you either maybe you acquire a company, or you bring a team on board to build an app, and maybe they use a specific service that's very targeted and a real strength of one cloud provider. Or you've got identity and access management that's super baked into one side, and maybe you're not really in a position to go outside of that. However, again, you've got another maybe legacy platform that's still on another cloud. So what do? Is it really worth your time to move one from one place to the other? I'd say that Kubernetes was the thing that a lot of us think, would be the enabler for multi-cloud. So let's count how many percentage points of your apps are 100% stateless, Kubernetes ready applications. I'm going to say that it's probably low double digits, if at all double digit, right? It's a lot of organizations are really far along, but they also have tons of classic infrastructure, IaaS, old school physical servers. Oh yeah, it's still a thing, right? But so multi-cloud for them is just simply, let the apps be where they need to be, and let me choose the hill that I want my engineering team to die on. Like, do I want to refactor, or do I want to just think about building towards something instead of constantly having to like shake up and recode everything just to go from cloud to cloud?
What I heard yesterday was very interesting. I was on a call with a customer, and the gentleman on the call said, everything should be on bare metal. And I was taken back by this day and age. I was like, wait, what? Wait a second. That's not the purpose. We were on a call for cloud stuff, so I didn't understand. But you did touch on a point that my previous public cloud leaders mentioned, is you're selecting a cloud or a multi-cloud environment based off the services that are available and unique to your application. Now, real quick, I got to get a plug in. Take a look up here for some recent public cloud podcasts that we've done within the last few days on this week-long series around it. Now, I want to touch on that just a little bit, and with those unique services, because are you going for those services? Now, you said you're not going to the cloud for the right reason that you think, which is very true, because most people are thinking they're going for vendor lock or savings, but why are you going there? Why are you multi-cloud? Now, you mentioned acquiring, which is very interesting. I want to touch on that then. But those services, those unique things that you're doing in multi-cloud. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the classic use case, which you've always got to retest your hypotheses in your use cases as well. But one of the most common ones we get asked, and I've seen it really play out. And again, if I mention a provider, it's only because I'm using it as a reference. I believe that obviously the top three providers have a podium, and there's a metric that would put each one of them on number one. So when I talk about the sort of the triad, the trifecta of cloud, we obviously talk about Azure, AWS, and Google. And Google is most well known and respected for incredible stuff around machine learning and their like bare Kubernetes infrastructure. Like they kind of invented it. So
yeah, I was just going to say, I just did a show. They kind of invented it back in the day that just got, just happened. So they better be experts on it. But
so there's obviously the huge potential that you can leverage these services that have been tried and tested at incredible scale, right? We call it Google scale for a reason. And then, of course, you got AWS, which has a much wider diversity of services and offerings. And they're moving much more into, like, even within an offering, a Fargate version of it, a serverless option of it. They've got lots of interlinking between the different services, as well as, across many regions and availability zones. And then Microsoft, which was classically known as, it started off as Windows Cloud, right? That's effectively what a lot of it was. And then people moved to, so traditional enterprise players love Microsoft because they can leverage their license agreements. They've got existing infrastructure that's Windows based. They've got familiarity. Tons of great services underneath it, like obviously Microsoft SQL, the scalable stuff. And I haven't even talked about, obviously, IBM Cloud, shout out, wink, right? Oracle Cloud, there are many options. And then you get further down into, the DigitalOceans and the Equinixes and the also, I want to be careful. I should, yeah, well, that's talk about the North American arrogance of regionalization of discussion of vendors, right? Alibaba gets excluded often by almost every measure. Alibaba is the largest public cloud in the world. But the one measure we can't use is the comfort level of a lot of North American organizations in placing their cloud workloads in the region, for a variety of reasons, right? It's an interesting challenge. But so I'll say, like, when I talk about the podium players and then the others, they're big others. They're really, really, really big others. But so anyways, but the point of this was, everybody says, I want to use the best machine learning. So the first thing I think is Google. Okay, great. But your enterprise data store is sitting backed by a Windows system hanging out of Azure. And so while intellectually it makes sense that you would use the best possible machine learning service, well, in fact, Microsoft has come a long way. And what's the cost of taking your data to that service? And it's in an adjacent cloud, which has latency. So it could be punishing latency, in fact. So quite often, even that use case is not real, because we say it. My other favorite case is people always used to ask me, they're like, hey, well, what about Black Friday? It's a great example. I said, we talk about scaling with Turbonomic all the time. Like, we can do real-time scaling and all this amazing stuff, and we do it. But then they would say, well, Eric, what about an example like Black Friday, where you suddenly have to scale incredibly high, and then all of a sudden you don't need it like 2 weeks later? And I'd say, are you running a retail organization that has a Black Friday, event that'll be like, oh no, it's just curious. I'm like, okay, so you're not actually testing the use case. You're just testing me.
Well, you're part of the use case. What can I say?
Then the funny thing is we actually had an incredible Black Friday story with Carhartt. That was a lot of fun. And they actually did play it out. And they're running a couple of cloud environments. They're centered on one cloud, but they've got adjacent services they leverage on other ones for, maybe it's other vendors too, because you could have a SaaS provider or another, SaaS-ish platform that's sitting in another cloud, and you want to wrap other things around it. So it's easier to kind of do that closer to the cloud and closer to the services that make sense.
Now, you mentioned data latency. Well, what about data sovereignty and data transfer? Because obviously they're all separate. They have to reside in it. Now, there might be one region or availability zone in a data sovereign country, but now you got to transfer between those. And the cost that's associated. In my last conversation, which was really interesting, we talked about the data transfer cost. And that's the last thing people think about. But then all of a sudden, they're spending more in transfer costs than they are on the services they're using for their multi-cloud. And now they realize that their multi-cloud was not such a good idea because they're transferring across the world, across the country. And what's your thoughts on that?
This is one of the biggest ones. Again, sort of the hidden cost, or the hidden gem, if you're a cloud sales architect, is that the struggle of data movement is real, in that we don't know. And if you show me a calculator for data transfer, and I'll show you an output of lies, because we don't. There's no way that we can measure the true effect until we put it in the situation. Once we actually then put the data there, and then patterns change and all this stuff. So it's a huge thing. It's much more so even than just pure like data sovereignty. I think people are fairly settled that as long as it's in the country, we're in decent shape. But even there, when you go inter-region, inter-cloud, all of a sudden, that data, both as a pure latency picture of pain, and then the second piece is moving data in and out. Of course, in is free. That's because data gravity is a fantastic thing as a cloud provider, because you want the data to be close to the services. So, bring your data, come closer to the boss, Clarice. It's that's what they want it to be, because they know that if you suddenly want to take your data out, you're paying by the gig.
Okay. Jumping on that, I know when you put your data into the cloud, one of the example is doing just backups from your local, maybe data center to the cloud. Hey, that's great. You can leave your data there. You pay for just sitting there. It's just pennies. Now, all of a sudden, something broke and you want to back it. You want to return that. Start paying back the transfer cost for it to go back. But you talked about, show me a calculator. Now, everybody knows I'm a big AWS fan, but in the entire podcast that I've done in this week-long series, I really haven't talked about them much, and I talked in general the multi-cloud. And I really want to come across as much as possible that we have a conversation on what is best and what are those public cloud leaders' thoughts around utilizing different services, around utilizing for an example is that you mentioned going between AWS regions. There's a cost between those regions. I had a customer who actually set up 2 of the same types of infrastructure in different regions and sent their traffic utilizing the DNS geolocation because it was cheaper to run them separately in a high availability thing and not talk to each other rather than communicate back and forth.
Yeah, this is I guess about 3 years now was the first time that Andy and I speak of this. This is public stuff, right? Like that. It was the first time we heard Angie Jassy actually say multi-cloud on stage. And it was this weird admission that there were other clouds.
I think I was there for it. Wait a second. Did he just admit others?
And the funny part is that every vendor, this is the tough part, right? So I'm lucky I can speak purely agnostically about multi-cloud because I can support multiple. Everybody has a sort of a commercial binding to their definition. So in Turboland, we are free and clear, right? Whatever cloud you put it on, we can help you with it. That's the goal. But then, of course, if you're a VMware, for example, when they say multi-cloud, they mean VMware Cloud on AWS, VMware Cloud Foundation on premises, and VMware Cloud on Azure. Like, that's not actually multi-cloud, that's cloud adjacent because you're just running VMware in someone else's data center. Now there's other stuff around adjacency of services and neat things. And they've sort of hacked the data challenge a little bit because I think they kind of roll some of the stuff in by the way they do some of the network traverse via there. It's funky, right? So even there, like I said, when it comes to calculators, there's a lot of supposition on the setup. And then in practice, like you said, then people all of a sudden realize like, we're getting buried on cost and latency. Why don't we re-architect to actually leverage this idea of, just keep the data local, sync asynchronously, use eventual consistency, and then, let's use geo diversity as a front end and really, really leverage the way that the pattern should work. But it's a big change in the pattern of application building to do that. Most people, they talk about like microservices to monoliths or monoliths to microservices. Well, where's the data? It's in a bloody monolithic database. It's probably in a mostly large database ecosystem. So you've got, you disaggregate one portion, but not everything is as easy to microservice out.
Well, going off, just one more thing on this cost calculator. There was a company I worked for when I first started utilizing AWS. We utilized the AWS calculator heavily. And it was like the biggest thing for us to go in there. And there was a data transfer button, like, okay, where do you think we're going to utilize this? Wow, were we wrong? And all of it. It was like a guesstimation. And I'll tell you what, if it ever came back to us like, okay, you were right, spot on all the instance types of storage, you were about 1,000 times off on the data transfer cost. In fact, it's just, and that really drives up the bill of the data center. Just the transfer costs between regions, let alone even, moving your data around, having the storage, getting the data in there. Great, man. No, that's free to you. You want to access it? All right, now let's talk.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's ultimately, for all the right reasons, right, is effectively the business model of many, even like vendor providers. Snowflake's a great example, right? They're like, yeah, well, we aren't going to charge you anything for data storage. However, you're going to basically do a straight through on the cost of the storage right from the cloud provider. So they themselves are not putting margin on it. And then their business is selling compute, and then say, let's just go right in your backyard. If we talk about multi-cloud, one of the neat things is leveraging the very unique systems within it. And, spot instances is one spot where a lot of people spot.
First of all, I want to say thank you for those unintended puns or shout outs for me. Thank you.
But the people thought this is really neat. Well, it's very opinionated, as it should be. It's opinionated infrastructure with a specific wrapper around it that's tied to IAM, that's tied to a lot of things. So it's not easy to just suddenly go to, batch instances in another cloud and go to different multi-cloud platforms. So once you start to get into the more unique opinionated services, then multi-cloud gets really hard. And that's why I think Kubernetes will be probably the most widely adopted true multi-cloud underlay. And like what it really is, it's just an API for compute. Just so happens the compute is cloud. So Kubernetes isn't really the magic. The magic is that your application architecture is able to survive on a Kubernetes underlay. And so you've architected for networking and storage, et cetera, et cetera. So, but then at that point, you've got freedom to roam within the confines of any Kubernetes underlay, which is pretty cool. It's a great flexibility. And, versus, like you said, we go further down into the SaaS, and you get the very specifics of the opinions of an API for RDS versus Azure SQL, et cetera.
Yeah, but you also mentioned that the percentage of your serverless stateless environment is very low at this point. So it's, unless everybody's architected it for Kubernetes and their application can support, that type of environment. I mean, granted, that is growing, exponentially. People were kind of gearing towards that. I don't think it's something that we're going to see anytime soon, that everything is Kubernetes based and its portability. Like you said, it was built with the expectation. People are like, this is solution multi-cloud. I can go anywhere, deploy it. But I have to switch gears. Going off of the Kubernetes one, what about the skill sets? Because you touch on Kubernetes, and I can switch from AWS to Azure, but the skill sets and the training and understanding of AWS, Azure, GCP of deploying that Kubernetes environment are not the same.
Yeah, there's the tooling, which is one thing, just the pure the native tooling. So the inbuilt tooling is fundamentally different, right? The neat thing was we saw, remember when Azure used to be called data, they weren't even called data centers. They were just called, I can't remember what it was, but they weren't called availability zones. They didn't even expose that as a construct. And then that other major cloud kind of made the world. So you would go to your Microsoft person and say like, so how do I spread this across availability zones? So like, we don't actually have that. They're like, okay, can you please?
We just have one data center in this state over here, this country over here.
It was like automatic distribution of certain things, and now we've all kind of aligned on at least the nomenclature. So we're good. We're all the same thing. We're closer. But as a human, if I want to get really good at stuff, first of all, just if you can solve identity and access management in one cloud, you deserve a medal, sir. That's a fantastically difficult problem to solve, of really good granular least privilege identity and access management. Then on top of that, the interlink between those services. So all of a sudden you had a couple of serverless things, you had some data transfer, you back up these services. You've got a lot of human effort that's wrapped around just day-to-day, day-to operations. And doing that with strength in multiple clouds, it's if you find that person and they're willing to work in your organization, they're probably starting their own startup on the desk, because it is a difficult challenge to solve, as again these things become more exciting and more complex and they move faster, right? If you were a VMware person, you just had to like just not wreck it for a long time. Like it didn't move fast.
Yep.
In the cloud, like the UX changes, the APIs, they're cleanly deprecated, but they change, they update. There are new things all the time. It's much more, it's a diversity of experiences required. And it's almost unfair to expect that your existing team should be thrown at 2 or more cloud environments with the expectation they're going to become like master's level capabilities inside each of those platforms.
Now, in my own opinion, and I got to state that I don't think there probably is one person or 2 people that can handle it. I personally cannot handle being an expert in multiple clouds. All right, there's so much, like you said, so many things change in the environment. Now, let's take an example, AWS. They release what's new all the time. Hey, this just came. All right, staying on top of that is a full-time job and after-hours job. I'm always reading articles, finding out what's new, testing out some things. I can't even carve out that time to learn Azure, even if it was provided for me at work, because what I become is a generalist in clouds. And a term that I kind of opened with in my previous, probably 2 days ago, is not the jack of all trades, the jack of all clouds, because now you're not a specialist. You are really going to, all right, I know, first of all, how many services does AWS have now? Over 180 or something?
Yeah.
How? I mean, how do you keep a hold of all those? So the skill sets are really varied. And then take that on top of somebody who's used to a traditional data center. Now say you're going to learn AWS this month, next month, you'll be learning Azure. And then after that, we might dabble in some GCP. And I want you to tell me which is the best. I'm not an expert, and it's taken me years to get to where I am, to learn everything along the way. I don't expect anybody else to do it. I expect you to hone in on AWS in a certain set of skills structure. And you mentioned security, and that's the biggest thing when you first start.
Yeah, it should be. it's, it's
Good.
it's not. Sadly, it's not. Right. It's an after. And I say this in all jest of everybody's fighting the good fight. Right. They're doing
Yep.
what they can, but we also we tend to go in. We all put our first firewall in with a really bad rule set, and we all built our first cloud app with the same rule set of kind of an any, and then some other granular stuff underneath it in the wrong order. We Look, it's not hard. My wife, she put a server up in the cloud. I can't remember which cloud it was. I think she did it in a couple, and it took about 24 hours before it got hit by ransomware. She purposefully hung this thing out there like a honeypot. So it worked really, really well. So the opportunity for error when firewalls and security and identity and access management are the front. But go into your console today, and I guarantee you've got secured. You've got SSH keys that are older than your kids sitting in somebody's account. That's not cool.
I've seen some of them. To be honest with you, I have seen some. Oh, you know what? We're using now. You can't change that key. Okay, but do you realize that's been compromised probably about 7 years ago? So
In fact, I saw one. It was like 1,500 days old, and it's called something dash temp, and it says like last used 4 hours ago. You're like, oh man.
oh man, that just makes me cringe. Knowing that it last used 4 hours ago. Who used that last? Does that? And here's the biggest thing. I know we're in the multi-cloud, but here's the biggest thing with that security is that it's not trackable. That key, you're not tracking who used it, where they used it. That person could have left the company 6 years ago, but keeping an eye on it. Yeah. Eric, I got a question for you. Say I did decide to go multi-cloud, what are some of the common mistakes that are made going multi? What could you give out there? What advice could you give before they even attempt multi?
The biggest thing is because you're going multi-cloud and there's a difficulty in being common in the practical approach and the tactical day-to-day operational processes. The biggest mistake that everybody makes is they have to build these artisanal infrastructure because it's harder to automate across multiple clouds without adopting another costly product, right? So the human instinct is, well, let me just stand this up first and then I'll automate it, which is the technical debt that's not even technical. That's like credit default swaps on technical debt. It is very, very much the biggest problem because we want to just try it out, do a proof of concept. Next thing, the proof of concept is called dash temp and it's live. And now you don't know how to automate the build of it because it's a live system and it's not really cloud ready because you keep getting told, whatever you do, don't let it go down. They're like, well, I thought that this is the idea of cloud infrastructure is that it's immutable and it's able to survive outages. They're like, no, it's just a data center that we pay for by the second instead of by the year. So this is the biggest thing of think about the automation ideally, right? Think about everything you have should be at least codified in some way or at least documented. And I mean, it's like a developer. Every developer should think of test-driven development. I believe in test-driven infrastructure. And that means that I could effectively go through that code and I could break it in portions and understand the outcome. And I can test that outcome in a lab environment by simply changing some variables. It's not that difficult to do. And there's good, even free tools to allow you to do that. HashiCorp has their Terraform, which is a very common platform. It allows you multi-cloud, but it then lacks because it's harder to centralize and share it between team members. However, at least if you build that as a practice first, then the next time you have to stand something up manually, you're going to think this sucks. And you are going to want to script it and automate it so that the person next to you can just take the same process and apply it themselves. But it's a human tendency to build now and fix later. So that's, I wish I had the answer for it because it's very hard to go in there and say, what's a thing that can do it across all clouds? and then it says $buy now on the big button. So, it's a tough decision that we all have to make. But hey, look, if folks want help with this stuff, like I forget about what the company name is that John and I have behind us. That we're out on Twitter and we're doing this stuff for real all the time. And there's great meetup groups, lots of other common practitioners and people in your peer group. Hit me up. I'm DiscoPosse literally on every possible network. I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn. If folks just want some unopinionated vendor-less guidance, the door is always open and we can share some experiences.
And so going off what Eric said, we're putting ourselves out there that if you have some questions, some guidance, reach out to us. We're happy to help. And when we say unopinionated, we will give you the pros and cons. You make your own decision. We don't tell you the news. We let you define the news yourself on what it is and what we're trying to reach. All right, before we wrap things up, I want to let everybody know if you enjoy this content, you want to see more content, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, smash that notification button, look up Eric at DiscoPosse. Be sure to follow along, check out our video and his shameless plug he did in the beginning, because as always, we have a lot of fun, a casual conversation. We hope we bring you enough information and some humor along the way. Eric, any last words before we end it?
Well, like I say, if my goal of every conversation I have is fun and informative, or at the very least it's fun, this was a lot of fun. I sure hope it's informative. It's really great. And it's being proven out in what you're doing, John. The fact that you, within seconds of describing any situation, you immediately talk about how you were discussing it with a customer. That tells you the legitimacy of when we talk about this stuff. This is not just me positing something, sitting in an ivory tower. This is on the ground stuff we're doing. So thanks for always making sure that like the customer is at the center and the community at the center of why we do this stuff. And so anyways, we hope that we can help in some small way every day.
Eric, thank you so much. I'm a big fan of your show. I love what you do. In fact, I signed up for your emails. I get your emails all the time. I start reading them. I look at it and listen to some of it. I also hit the podcast and let it play in the background while I work, because I enjoy listening to you and everything you've done. So I really appreciate it. Plus, I like bringing those real world experiences that we encounter daily. This is why we all still have day jobs, because we want to bring them to the podcast and the show and others, along with other public cloud leaders and experts. All right, Eric, thank you so much for joining me for this podcast on multi-cloud. I hope you enjoyed yourself as much as I have.
Most def. Thank you.
Yes, have yourself a good one.